Picture this. Two people walk into the same job interview on the same morning. Same industry, same years of experience, same qualifications on paper. They are interviewing for the same role, and they are genuinely equal candidates in almost every measurable way. But one of them needs this job. Next month's rent depends on the offer. The emergency fund is empty. The credit card has a balance that is getting harder to ignore. Every answer in that interview is filtered through one quiet background calculation. I cannot afford to mess this up. The body language is slightly tighter. The answers are slightly more careful. When the hiring manager mentions the salary range, there is a fraction of a second of visible relief that an experienced interviewer reads immediately. This person needs the number. That need just cost them $5,000 they will never see and may never understand they lost. The other person wants this job. It looks right. The role is a step forward. But if the offer comes in low, or the culture feels wrong, or the hiring manager says something that raises a flag, they can walk away. They have $10,000. They have 6 months of runway. They have the one thing that changes every negotiation they will ever have for the rest of their financial life: an option. The salary the first person accepts is lower, not because they are less talented, not because they are less prepared, because the person across the table can sense, in the specific way that experienced hiring managers always can, whether the candidate in front of them needs the deal or wants it. And need is the weakest negotiating position that exists. Want, from a place of genuine stability, is an entirely different conversation. This is what $10,000 actually does. Not what most people think it does. Not what most financial content says it does. What it actually does, mechanically, psychologically, mathematically, to every important decision you make from the moment you cross it forward. My name is Jack. I am 56 years old, and I have spent more time than is probably healthy studying the gap between what financial milestones are supposed to do and what they actually do. $10,000 has the widest gap of any threshold I have watched. What most people expect when they get there is almost entirely wrong. What actually happens is more interesting and more important than the number itself. Stay until the end, because there is a calculation at the center of this that nobody makes. And when you run it, $10,000 stops looking like the beginning of a savings journey and starts looking like the highest return investment you will ever make. Subscribe and hit the thumbs up if this changes how you see this number. Quick note, I am not a financial advisor, and nothing here is financial advice. One honest thing first, this is not a video about the investment returns on $10,000. If you put $10,000 in an index fund earning 8% annually, you will generate $800 in year one. That is real money. That is compound interest beginning to work on a real base. But $800 is not why $10,000 changes the game. Most financial content stops there and leaves you with a technically accurate but fundamentally incomplete picture of what this threshold actually does. I am going to show you the return that nobody calculates, the one that does not appear on any chart, and it is significantly larger than $800 a year. The research on financial scarcity is specific, and it is not flattering to anyone who has experienced it. Princeton economists published work showing that financial scarcity consumes cognitive bandwidth in a measurable way, equivalent in some studies to losing 11 IQ points compared to someone who is not in financial stress. Not because people without savings are less intelligent, because their brains are occupied, running a constant background calculation. What happens if something goes wrong? How do I cover the gap if it appears? Can I afford the consequences of this decision if it does not work out? This calculation runs constantly, in every meeting, in every performance review, in every conversation about career advancement, and it makes every decision it touches slightly smaller than it would have been otherwise. You do not negotiate salary as hard because you need the offer. You do. Not push back on unreasonable demands because you cannot afford the conflict. You do not raise your hand for the high visibility project that could advance your career, because high visibility means scrutiny, and scrutiny means risk, and risk means potential income disruption. And income disruption is catastrophic when there is nothing underneath you. Scarcity mode does not make you perform worse at your job. It makes you perform smaller. It makes you optimize for safety when you should be optimizing for growth. And it does this invisibly. You experience it as being careful and responsible, not as being limited. The specific decisions it affects accumulate quietly across years. You accept the counteroffer instead of leaving because the transition feels too risky. You let the difficult conversation with your manager go unaddressed because conflict feels dangerous when your livelihood depends on the relationship. You say yes to extra work you should have negotiated compensation for because saying no feels like it might cost you something you cannot afford to lose. Each of these decisions seems reasonable in isolation. Across 5 years, they add up to a career that is smaller than the one you were capable of building. With the same effort, the same talent, and no awareness that the filter was operating at all. Here is the calculation nobody makes. And this is the return on $10,000 that makes everything else look secondary. The average American who successfully negotiates their starting salary earns between $5,000 and $10,000 more per year than someone with identical qualifications who accepts the first offer. Over a career, with annual raises calculated on top of a higher base, that gap compounds into several $100,000 of lifetime earnings. The research on what predicts successful salary negotiation consistently points to one factor above all others: the candidate's willingness to walk away. And the willingness to walk away is almost entirely determined by whether walking away is survivable. $10,000 makes walking away survivable, which means $10,000, through its effect on a single negotiation, can produce a return of 50 to 100 times the original amount over a 30-year career. Not from compound interest, from the behavioral shift it produces in the highest leverage financial decision most people make. The return on $10,000 is not $800 per year. It is potentially the trajectory of your entire career. And nobody puts that in the savings account calculator. But here is where the compounding gets genuinely uncomfortable to look at, because the negotiation effect is just the beginning. People with financial buffers are significantly more likely to pursue career advancement opportunities than people without. They apply for promotions, they take stretch assignments that carry risk. They leave bad situations when the situation is genuinely bad instead of when they have no other option. They explore opportunities without the desperation that kills negotiation. And every one of these behaviors compounds. A better opportunity leads to a better position, leads to a higher income base, leads to a larger buffer, leads to even better opportunities. The $10,000 buffer does not just change one negotiation. It changes the quality of every professional decision for as long as you protect it. Here is what that compounding looks like in numbers that most financial content never calculates, because they do not fit neatly into a chart. Someone who negotiates $5,000 more in starting salary because they had the buffer to walk away, and receives annual raises of 3% on top of that higher base, will earn approximately $170,000 more over a 30-year career than someone with identical qualifications who accepted the first offer because they needed the income to start. $170,000 from one negotiation, made possible by $10,000 that was never even touched in the process. The buffer did not get spent. It just changed the conversation. and the conversation produced a return that no compound interest calculation will ever approach. Now stop, because I want to show you what this looks like in a specific life before we continue. A man I know spent 3 years turning down every career opportunity that came his way. Not because the opportunities were wrong, because every one of them involved a transition period. A few months between roles, a period of reduced income while establishing himself somewhere new, a gap that was perfectly manageable on paper and genuinely catastrophic in his actual financial situation. He was making decent money, his lifestyle was reasonable, but his savings balance was essentially zero, and his credit card balance was not. Every opportunity that arrived got filtered through the same calculation. Can I afford the gap? The answer was always no. He watched colleagues he had outperformed for years advance past him, not because they were better at the work, but because they could afford to take the steps he could not. He told me once that the most demoralizing part was not the financial stress itself. It was knowing exactly what he should do and being completely unable to do it. He could see the right move, he just could not afford it. In his early 30s, he spent 11 months doing one thing differently. He stopped treating savings as what was left after everything else. He automated a transfer the day his paycheck arrived. Before rent, before food, before anything else had a chance to absorb it. He told me those 11 months were the longest of his financial life. Not because the sacrifice was extreme, because he kept doing the math and the number kept being not enough yet. Month 9 was the hardest. He had $7,000 and something needed repairing, and he paid for it in cash and watched the number go backwards and had to start again. He nearly stopped. He did not stop. 11 months after he started, he had $10,000. He said he checked the account 3 times that morning because the number did not look real. 6 months after crossing 10,000, he took an opportunity he would have declined in any of the previous 3 years. The transition involved 2 months of reduced income that hit the buffer instead of hitting him directly. The new role paid 30% more than the one he had left. Within 18 months, the buffer had rebuilt itself entirely from the higher income. He does not talk about the 30% raise when he tells this story. He talks about month 9, the $7,000, the thing that needed repairing, the decision to start again instead of stop. He said that was the moment he understood that $10,000 was not a number you arrived at. It was a number you chose, repeatedly, to keep going toward, even when the math went backwards on you. Not because of the money, because of what the money let him do. The compound interest on $10,000 at 8% is $800 in year 1. Real, meaningful, the beginning of something. But the compound interest on the career decision that $10,000 made possible, the 30% salary increase, the higher base for every future raise, the trajectory shift that came from finally being able to say yes to the right thing, that return is not measurable in the same way. It is just significantly larger. And here is something worth understanding about that $800 before we continue, because it matters even though it is not the headline number. $800 arrived in an account with his name on it because math ran on a base, not because he worked for it, not because he got lucky, not because the market did something extraordinary. Just because he held a large enough number long enough for it to generate its own return. That experience, watching money appear because existing money was working, changes something in how you think about wealth building that no book or lecture or financial advice ever quite manages. It is not the $800. It is the proof that the mechanic works. And proof motivates in a way that theory does not. The people who protect their buffer through the early years and watch compound interest produce its first visible results almost never go back to zero voluntarily. The experience itself becomes a retention mechanism. Here is where most people ruin this, and I have watched it happen consistently enough in 56 years that I want to name it directly. They reach $10,000. They feel the shift. The breathing room is real. The relief is real. And then they use the buffer to solve the past instead of protect the future. The credit card balance that has been bothering them gets cleared. The car that has been unreliable gets replaced. The apartment upgrade they have been deferring suddenly feels affordable. None of these are irrational decisions in isolation. All of them drain the buffer that was producing the shift. And here is what most people do not understand until it is too late. The shift does not survive the drainage. The cognitive breathing room quietly disappears. The scarcity filter reactivates. The negotiating position weakens again. The version of yourself that was making better decisions from a place of stability starts making smaller decisions again without fully understanding why. And the credit card gets paid off, and the car is more reliable, and the apartment is nicer, and none of it produced anything close to what the buffer was silently producing every day it was left intact. You did not spend $10,000. You spent the behavioral infrastructure that $10,000 was building. Two people, same resume, same interview, same morning. One needs the job, one wants it. The salary difference between those two conversations, from identical candidates with identical qualifications in identical circumstances, is somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000 annually. Compounded over a career with raises building on top of a higher base, that gap grows into something that no savings account interest rate will ever match. All of it traceable to a single variable. $10,000 that was never spent, never touched, just held, and allowed to change the conversation that followed. Your $10,000 is not a savings milestone. It is the mechanism by which every important financial decision you make for the rest of your life gets to come from a different place than the one it has been coming from. Protect it like what it actually is, not a number. A position that changes how you walk into every room where money is discussed, every conversation where your value is being negotiated, every decision where the stakes are high enough that who you are when you make it matters as much as what you decide. And positions, unlike numbers, compound in ways that no calculator has ever been built to measure.